Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Marianne Van Berlo, and I will be moderating Travel Talk Live today. With me is Judith Cox, who will monitor the questions that you type into the chat, and she will ask our speaker to answer those questions at the end of her talk. Today's speaker is Master Gardener Andrea Knight, who says she has been working on a 20-year project of turning her front and backyards into an oasis of color, as well as a space for pollinators and other local fauna. Andrea admits she has made many mistakes, but quickly adds that she has learned from those mistakes. Living in the city doesn't always give you a lot of space to work with, but it does provide opportunities to exercise creativity and to explore plants and ideas that you may not have considered otherwise. Growing up, Andrea was a member of her local 4-H club, where the motto was, learn to do by doing. And Andrea still lives by that motto every day in her garden.
My computer.
Andrea.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Thank you very much for the incredibly warm welcome. So this is my first time doing Travel Talk Live, so I hope I share lots of excellent information and folks have an enjoyable time this afternoon. So indeed, big ideas for small spaces. And so a little bit passionate about gardening. Most of my space, my house faces east and west, so I get lots of partial shade and full shade. I'm also on the inside of a crescent, and my neighbors have beautiful mature trees, which I adore as someone who comes from the prairies, but again, limits my sun. I have a city lot. I'm right in the city. I live not more than about 5 minutes from South Keys. And what this certainly means for me, but maybe many people share this challenge, is that I don't seem to have enough space for all the plants and ideas that come to me year over year. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, as Marianne noted, is through my own learning and experimentation, as well as having conversations and learning from others. And so once again, thank you so much for joining me today. So in terms of big ideas for small spaces, as you can see, one of the things that I've learned is that layers aren't just for the weather. And I have found that over time, I can take one spot and I can actually house several plants because, you know, they'll mature or bloom or have different growth habits. You know, timing can be everything. Sometimes, you know, being able to identify, you know, whether things are showing up at the beginning of the year or the middle of the year or at the end of the year. Experimenting with different combinations. My goodness, I have contributed to the local economy and our nurseries and various folks who grow plants so much over the past 20 years because I get excited and I find something. And one of the most recent examples of this is I absolutely adore delphiniums. But what I can inform everybody is that they do not adore where I keep trying to plant them. So we'll have to continue to see if I continue to contribute to the local economy with delphiniums, but I haven't given up yet. But it is that experimentation with different combinations and adapting to what works well and what doesn't. And so one of the things I'll get to show you was, you know, some ideas and some plants that, you know, for me, I thought, you know, worked particularly well. And, you know, were quite a surprise because they weren't ones that I'd originally considered or even thought about, you know, versus others where, you know, folks kind of were giving me recommendations or growing up and working with my mother and my grandmothers. I thought, well, perhaps this will maybe do the trick, although the weather patterns and the climate from where I grew up in southern Saskatchewan to Ottawa has also been quite a learning adventure. And so this was just, these are some pictures of, there's a particular kind of a spot in my front yard. And please ignore in a couple of the pictures, the vinca, which attempts to continue to take over. It creeps in from my neighbor's yard and I have to lift it every year. But, you know, kind of from left to right, just showing that, you know, a number of years ago, I started planting crocus. And the crocus are one of the first things that come up. And, you know, the bulbs don't take up a lot of space, but they provide that real splash of color right away, you know, first thing in the spring, particularly when other things are just starting to turn green. And I always find it's really great. This was a shot of a great patch of purple crocus. I've tried to introduce yellows and whites, again, just to really provide that great splash of color. And then you'll see as we, you know, kind of continue to progress, you know, once the crocus are starting to finish, I also have Scyllia, and they start to come up, and you'll see there, and I apologize, I think that's my camera, but you know, there are some kind of paler, you know, blues, or almost they look white in this picture. And then, you know, the deeper blues, which again, just gives that great splash of color, and it's transitioning from, you know, the first point of spring, a little bit later into spring. And then in the pretty much the exact same space on the far right, hopefully everyone can see, I've had some wonderful success with hyacinth. And it's incredible because as the hyacinth are coming up and just starting to bloom, this is when I actually start to also see some of the insects coming up in my garden. And I have to say, they really, really enjoy coming into the hyacinths. And I wasn't able to capture it this year, but in previous years, some of those flowers will actually be vibrating because they've got little bees and creatures in them, and they're just shaking with, I guess, excitement at having a first crack at some of these flowers. And so this is, you know, one of the things that over the years, like I say, I've certainly tried other things. One of the adventures, I must say, for me, which would maybe surprise many of you who are, you know, perhaps far more experienced than I, daffodils. I have planted daffodils so many times. I love them. I think they're gorgeous, and people tell me they're easy to grow. Well, apparently they're not easy to grow for me. And so that's one of the things that over the years, I've just decided, either I don't know if someone's coming along and scooping them all up on me, or if I just don't kind of have those growing conditions right. But it's unfortunately something I haven't been able to conquer, but perhaps someday I'll be able to figure that one out. But another experiment that didn't go maybe according to plan. And then kind of showing similar space as we move into you know, late spring. And as folks can see, we get you know, bleeding hearts. I was blessed when I actually purchased the property. The bleeding heart you can see on the far left was already there. And so honestly, just year over year, I let it do its thing. It's incredibly happy to be there, incredibly low maintenance. And I just find that by, you know, early July, you know, the leaves start to go yellow, and I'll trim it back. And along with, you can see some tulips that I've actually managed to establish and grow and really flourish. And then as we look to the middle, you know, again, you know, some of the tulips, you can see some of my regular hyacinths still blooming, the bleeding heart. I've got a second plant now. It's, you know, really starting to kind of come out, and also some grape hyacinth, which, you know, again, just providing that splash of color and flowers and opportunities for, you know, pollinators and everyone who's waking up to come and hopefully, you know, hang out in my garden and find what they're looking for. And in addition, just provide some color, because I don't know if others find this, but I certainly find that as we're, you know, getting from winter into spring, I'm a bit starved to see some different colors than brown and white and gray. I don't know if others feel the same way, but I know for me, it's being able to, you know, see those colors and be able to, you know, experience plants again after that hiatus. And so this is, you know, some of the pieces that I've done here. And as I mentioned earlier, daffodils, which I've yet to be successful with. And I've also been experimenting with a slightly different type of crocus. It's an orange crocus. And what's interesting is, like, it'll come up the first year, and then the second year they don't come up. And I'm not too sure what that is. I'm continuing to kind of experiment because I was really hoping, as you can see in this middle shot, they're a little bit later. Well, you can see in the middle shot, they're not there because this year they didn't come back for me. But I'm hoping at some point to be able to maybe have them show up and have that splash of, really bright orange to add to the color palette that I already have here. And then as we continue through the season, this is, I'm calling it Summer Glory. And as I noted earlier in the year, one of the plants that I certainly wasn't super familiar with, and it started as a gift, a very teeny tiny plant. I don't think it was in anything bigger than a 3-inch pot, and that's the cranesbill geranium. And unfortunately, I don't know the species because it was a friend who kindly said, well, I have, a plant that I think will do incredibly well in your garden. And I said, lovely, because at the time I was willing to take donations and accept plants that weren't costing me money. And as you can see, it went from that tiny, tiny plant in like I say, about a 3-inch pot. And that space now is pretty much 3 feet by 3 feet wide. And what's absolutely wonderful about it is that it will bloom. And in fact, as we're chatting today, it is doing, it's really kicking off and showing all those gorgeous, beautiful white blooms. And if I let it finish and then cut it back, it'll actually come again later in the summer, which I thought, isn't that wonderful? We get like a gift twice using, that plant and in that space. And just for situational awareness, it is underneath, I'll put that in quotations, this geranium, that where you saw the pictures of the hyacinth, the tulips, the grape hyacinth. So they've all finished. And now the geranium is coming up and really kind of taking over that space and providing, beautiful greenery. Now off to the left, you can also see there's a rose bush there. He's kind of crept into my photo because I wasn't into sophisticated photo cropping. But he is there beside and also provides, just spectacular color from June all the way to September, really. And if I keep trimming him back, he'll keep blooming until frost. Now on the right, what folks will see is another gift and experiment. I'd certainly never heard of them before, but what's called a giant lily. And unfortunately, again, I don't have the specific species. The bulbs were, I'm saying bulbs, my apologies. I don't think it's a bulb precisely, but I was given a gift. And again, this started as, the first year, I think, I had 2, kind of stalks come up. And then the next year it was 5. And then the next year it was 8. And I think this year I'm up to 14. And each one of those mature stalks will produce multiple blooms. And what I'm unable to do in this picture, but for those of you who enjoy flowers that, provide incredibly bright color, but also smells, this one has an incredible perfume that, again, when they're in their glory, some of those heads will start to bob up and down because they have so many different bees and insects and things going in and feeding and getting quite excited and being attracted to them, which I think is really quite wonderful. And these will really take me through, almost like right into August, which is, really quite lovely. And then we get into, and again, similar space, what I'm going to call fall fun. And again, although this time I will certainly give credit to a dear friend of mine who donated a plant, the Rudbeckia, the brown-eyed Susan. And as you can see here, I planted around it. I added some pansies. I can't help myself. I do love the little creatures. I think pansies are wonderful with their faces. They always make me smile. But here it's that Rudbeckia and just that glorious splash of yellow with their nice brown eyes. And that really starts to take over. And you can see behind, the geranium is done. It's starting to fade out. And in fact, that's even after like the second round that it's bloomed. And, but, you know, in a similar space. And so people's eyes hopefully being drawn away from the geranium and really focusing on the rudbeckia. And then, you know, very close and right beside it is a smooth aster that, again, I was very lucky to acquire, and was another plant that when I first purchased it, probably in a 4-inch pot. And now each year I actually have to dig some out. Otherwise, I think it would take over my entire front yard. It's so pleased and happy with where it is. And it just provides some incredible color and flowers starting in very late August and rolling right into September. And it's another plant that I've noticed, again, perhaps because it's towards the end of the year. I couldn't find a picture, unfortunately, but I wanted to have a picture where I had the flowers, but there was a couple of days where you couldn't actually see the flowers, again, for all the bees and the insects that were just covering the flowers, and obviously quite excited by what they were finding there. And so this is, you know, a piece that I've done in my front yard. But the other idea that I wanted to share with folks that I've found quite successful is, you know, going vertical. And I think, you know, some of that's been shown with the plants like my, you know, giant lilies. And so taking anything that can climb, whether that's clematis, peas, roses, morning glory, being able to leverage containers and finding a way to hang containers and create, you know, new spaces for plants. And actually taking a look at some taller plants that don't spread too much or can be easily contained. And so I wanted to show this is one of the examples of, you know, going vertical. Here it's a teeny tiny space. It's maybe at the very bottom, like a 1 foot square in terms of ground and soil. I decided the one year I'll give it a try. This is my ongoing experiment. And I, you know, planted a rose, the John Davis. And this is the west facing side of my house. So it gets lots of great afternoon sun. The rose is now approaching, like I say, 15 feet tall. And what we started to do is we talked to our neighbors and we've attached trellis. So we're actually training the rose to travel between the two houses. So as people come into the garden gate, they're actually walking in under an arch of, at certain times of the year, blooming roses. And this is one where I'm really blessed. I'll tell a very quick story because I know we're getting close to the end. I don't know how many people today online were impacted by the tornadoes that came through. My house and property was one of those that was impacted. So all the siding where you see that rose sitting was ripped off along with the fence. And so this rose ended up right on the ground. I trimmed it right back. Folk came in and redid my siding, and I had no idea if I'd ever, you know, see this rose again. But here he is. It's post the tornado, clearly happy, and was able to survive, even being ripped right off the house. And then having to deal with people tromping all over it, which I think my husband sent me to work because I was constantly harassing the construction workers and telling them not to step on it, which I don't know that they appreciated, but you know what my priority is. Another thing I've had great success with is clematis. This is a Jackmani. He's on my fence that faces south. Right above him, he's in part shade under a maple tree. And as you can see from the picture, I've got iris underplanted under the clematis. So I get the iris in the spring, they finish, and then the clematis comes up, and it's both are a deep purple, which is, of course, one of my absolute favorite colors. But it's another opportunity to be able to leverage space when you can no longer expand on the horizontal plane. And then the other piece, the hanging baskets, which I noted. And so for me, you'll see I took some pictures at the front of the house and on my deck. Anytime I can find a vertical space and hang a hook on it, I will do so. I usually have between 6 and 8 hanging baskets at any one given time. For the purpose of the presentation today, sharing some in the back and in the front, both, you know, super bells or calabrochia, the cherry star in the back, and the lemon, the slice up front, which of course made my husband laugh because I went out shopping for plants and came home and told him I was hungry. He couldn't figure out why until I was sharing with him these plants. So these are just some of the ideas that I've been experimenting with in terms of bringing color and being able to leverage as much space as possible in a very, relatively small city lot. And I am definitely happy and open for questions.
Thank you so much, Andrea. That was excellent. Now, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. But I have a question for you. I noticed you had lots of things like tulips and crocus and hyacinths. Do you have any squirrels around there? Because they sure go for those kind of bulbs. What did you do?
Well, I do have, we definitely have a healthy squirrel population. And since the pandemic, we also have a healthy rabbit population and other pieces. And so great question, Judith. A couple of things, and again, this has been a great experiment. So one year I planted all the bulbs and then I put, like the black gardening cloth over top of those spaces and pinned it down, hopefully, preventing anything from digging it up. Another year, someone recommended to me as I was planting the bulbs to add blood meal and bone meal, because apparently the blood meal will deter creatures. And then last year, I was very excited. I haven't seen him or her this year, but I had a junior Cooper's hawk sitting on my fence. And I thought, okay, well, apparently, other creatures are noticing that we have an increased population of various types of rodents. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe the ecosystem is now going to introduce, some predators that'll help, maintain the balance. I personally was quite excited. I don't know if others would be nearly as excited with having a hawk sitting on their fence, but I just thought it was the bee's knees. So those are some of the things I've tried, but I think, Judith, what I've come to is that it's a tax. And so anytime you want to try to plant bulbs, you just have to, nature's going to charge you a tax. Just hopefully not 100%, which is, I feel like what's happened to me with the daffodils.
Oh, that's really good. Do you ever bring any of those pots inside that you've grown, or do you specifically grow outside plants?
I primarily focus on outside plants. Now during COVID, because I was working from home instead of heading into an office, I decided to add things like African violets and orchids to my indoor environment. Now with the African violets, I do incredibly well. With the orchids, it was only recently that I discovered that they weren't getting enough light. And so they weren't blooming, but I put them under a UV light, and my mini orchid just started blooming, and I have a second orchid that's set out a flower spike. So I'm quite excited, but I was coaching them. This will make everyone laugh. I was coaching my orchids to say, now in the future, if you please, I would prefer that you bloom in the winter, not when everything in my garden is in full bloom. If possible.
Yeah.
But I'm excited that they're reblooming in the first place, which has never ever happened to me. So thank you for that question.
Go. Yeah. We have a question about daffodils. Iris says her daffodil, the leaves come up, but the daffodil itself has never bloomed. And she's wondering if your leaves actually come up from the daffodils, or when you planted them, nothing happened?
Nothing. No.
Okay.
No, like I leaves would be a progress to what I've experienced to date with daffodils. So
that is so strange. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do know they recommend planting daffodils quite deep, but other than that, I think another tax from Mother Nature by the looks of things.
Indeed.
Are there plants besides delphiniums that you find you want but are having difficulty growing in your small space?
Oh my gosh. So, if folks were interested, I could share with you the laundry list of things. I keep a list of perennial plants, and on the list, there's a strike through of various plants, but yeah, delphiniums over time. The other one that I've been challenged with, but I do think it's sunlight. That is my theory for now. Lupins, which I also just think are absolutely gorgeous, and I love them.
Sun.
Yeah, like, and I think that one is, I just have to accept that I don't have enough sun, or I have to convince my husband to let me dig up a part of the front yard where he keeps his grass, so I can have a patch of lupins. Shasta daisies. Oh gosh.
So
Like I
all the
said,
sun-loving perennials.
a lot of the sun-loving
Yeah.
perennials. I have a teeny tiny area in my backyard that approaches 6 hours of sun. But you're
Were the
absolutely right.
giant lilies in sun? Were the
They
giant
seem
lilies
to,
in sun?
they get the morning sun and that's it.
Oh, that's interesting. Another
Yeah,
question here is, when you're cutting your geranium, you wait until the bloom is totally finished and then you cut it. Is that what you're doing?
correct.
Okay, so, and how do you cut it? Right down a little bit? How?
I tend to leave about 2 inches of the plant, like just enough where some of the stems and the leaves are still there. And that seems to allow it to regenerate. One year I sheared it right off of the ground. It came back, but it didn't rebloom. So that was apparently too aggressive.
Okay, so 2 inches is the catch.
It certainly
Okay.
is for that beautiful white one I have in the front yard.
Oh, it's beautiful. Are you considering adding some other ones in for contrast, or is there room?
Well, that's always the question, Judith. So I actually have been eyeing up my neighbors up the street have a beautiful, get ready for it, deep purple geranium. So one of my favorite colors, and I'm in negotiations with them to see if we could do a trade where I could contribute some white geraniums and they can maybe trade some deep purple ones. And I think what would happen is I'd have to carve out some of the space that the white geraniums currently take up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, that would be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say your garden is pretty much covered now, or are you eyeing the lawn?
Well, that's a great question, because if that is a 6-year conversation with my husband, who up to this point has said he doesn't want the lawn to disappear, but I've been able to negotiate. So the 20-year project was, we've been in the house for roughly 20 years. And each year I negotiate between a foot and a foot and a half expansion on my front garden bed. Now, some years I win, and then out come all the tools, and I get to take over a bit more grass. Other years I am less successful, Judith, and so I have to bide my time and wait, and see if I can negotiate again.
Yes,
So
just be patient. Apparently, there is a note here that spiderwort, which you can get in purple, grows well in shade. Do you have any of that?
wonderful. That's a great
You might look into
suggestion.
that.
I
Yeah,
will definitely make a note, because I'm always interested in plants that don't require full sun and do well, particularly if they're a little bit crowded, because that seems to be how I operate. Although I am focusing now more and more on a bit of negative space around my plants, but I get caught because somebody talks to me or they offer me something and I feel like I can make it fit. That's always my challenge.
Are there any more questions? I don't see any more here in the chat.
Well, thank you, Andrea and Judith, and thank you to all our viewers today. Please join us next week when the topic will be Go Native with Claire McCaughey. Claire will review why native plants are so important to our ecosystem.